When people ask you what you want, does your mind just tend to go blank? For a long time, I didn't actually think this was an issue because this has never been something I struggled with. But when I met my husband, I realized that this is actually a problem that people face on a regular basis. Now, my guess is the reason I didn't struggle with this is because I was the scapegoat in my family, where I took the blame for pretty much everything that went wrong. And while that was unpleasant, I think it was actually a blessing because it taught me that my role in life was not dependent upon what other people thought. I was never taught to please others in order to get by. Whereas my husband, that was exactly what he learned. And so many other people that I know have faced the same issue that he does all the time. So figuring out what you want has been something that I've had to think about in order to try to help him and help other people who are struggling with this who weren't necessarily the scapegoats. Because let's face it, most of us are taught that we need to help others and make them happy in order to be happy ourselves. We learn to be people pleasers, and that has a detrimental impact, even though it is helpful for survival. So in this video, we're going to dive into the steps on how you can figure out what you want. Did you know that when it comes to figuring out what you want, there are only actually 6 things that you need to look at in order to figure that out? 3 of those are physical, and 3 of those are non-physical. The physical ones are something having to do with your finances, something having to do with your relationships, and something having to do with your health and your body. The non-physical ones are something having to do with your emotions, like controlling your emotions, something having to do with your belief structures, and something having to do with your knowledge. And as you dig into each of these avenues, you start to see the nuances where it's like, okay, when it comes to my physical health, I want to lose weight, or I want to gain muscle, or I want to be healthier. And when it comes to things like my emotional state, like I want to have more control over my emotions, I want to be less reactive, things like that. You can subdivide these categories out, but the basic idea, these 6 avenues of desire, as I call them, are a great starting place because you can know right from the beginning that you have 6 things that you want at any given time. And one of those is going to be more important to you than other ones. And as you start to dig into each of those avenues, you're going to get little spurts of ideas of what that could potentially be. Are you overweight? Well, then you probably want to lose some weight. Are you struggling financially? Well, you probably want to gain a little bit more. Are you dealing with issues in your relationship? Well, maybe you want to find peace. These are things that you can easily kind of suss out and distinguish, and they will help guide you toward more specific desires as you go. In these avenues, you're going to find more general goals where it's like, I want to be happier, I want to be more successful, I want to be having a better relationship, I want my marriage to work out a little bit better. And so when it comes to figuring out the specific goals, the question you need to ask yourself is, how do I achieve that goal? What paths can I follow in order to reach that accomplishment? And that's going to be the whittling process where you actually narrow things down. And as ideas start to come up, you have to then play them out in your head and be like, okay, what are the consequences of this particular path? Can I live with them? And if you can't live with them, then dismiss it, and you know that there's another path for you. And then you just continue to play these scenarios over and over again, and you kind of figure out what you are and are not willing to deal with. You have to figure out what you don't want oftentimes before you figure out what you do want. And I think for those of us who don't struggle with this question of what do I want, generally we just know that oftentimes we're going to have to kind of whittle it down. We're going to have to test things out. We're going to have to try it. We have less fear of making the wrong choice. And I think this is probably the biggest issue that people who struggle with knowing what they want fall into, which is they're afraid of making the wrong choice. They're afraid of the judgment that other people are going to pass on them if and when they fail. And generally speaking, there are actually no wrong paths. And I think this is something that's super duper important for you to understand, because oftentimes we think there is only one right path for our lives, when the reality is there are only paths, and every path has its consequences. Every path you choose requires sacrifice of some kind. If, for example, you want to have a family, you have to sacrifice the time you could have spent playing video games, because playing video games takes you away from meeting people. And if you want to have a relationship, you have to meet people. So any path that you choose to follow will, by default, have some kind of sacrifice involved in it. And that's why playing out scenarios is so important. But when it comes to actually choosing a path and moving forward, you just have to pick a path. Like it honestly doesn't even matter which path you follow. I would definitely say don't go down the path of doing illegal activities, But aside from that, generally speaking, it's not going to matter because you have to learn. You have to test this stuff out. You have to keep going. You have to keep trying things because without that, you're never going to know what you want because you're not seeing what's available in the world. So you have to just make choices. So generally speaking, if you struggle with making decisions, start by making little ones. Give yourself 2 choices in the morning for what you're going to eat for breakfast and choose from them. And then when somebody asks you a question where there's a potential choice to be made, always set an intention to make a decision, whether you care or not. Because it doesn't matter about how important a decision is to you in the moment. The fact that you're practicing making a decision is actually going to help you understand yourself better so that you can figure out what you want. So generally speaking, this is not as complicated as you think. It just requires a lot of practice. You have to be willing to test the waters. You have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to try things out and figure out what you don't like and what you do like. And as you do that, it will become clearer what you do and don't want. A prime example of this is I've always known I wanted to start a business. It's something that's always been appealing to me. But I've gone through 8 or 9 different business models trying to figure out what business is the best one for me and what business is going to give me the lifestyle that I'm looking for. And I met a lot of false paths along the way. It's only now, after so many different failed business attempts, that I have finally found the business model that I want to work with for the rest of my life. So you're going to have something like that as well, where there's a testing phase where you have to whittle it out, figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And that ultimately is what is holding you back. You don't want to do that process. You're worried that people are going to judge you. You're worried that you're going to lose the relationships you have because of this failure process. And that's just not going to happen. I mean, even if it does, though, are those really the people you want in your life? Or do you want the people who want to support you as you grow and learn and become better? Because ultimately, that's what you're doing. You're becoming the best version of yourself and helping the world improve by doing so. But of course, figuring out what you want is only part 1 of this process. The next bit you need to know is how to go about achieving those goals. And for that, you need to watch this video, which describes the 3 steps you need in order to achieve any goal that you set.